Behind every investigation lies a story. Behind every trial lies truth. This is American Justice.
I'm fairly certain we just found a body along the mountain bike trail. Her clothes are all taken off.
Some violent, almost obsessed intruder came into my community and hurt one of my kids.
I didn't want to believe that it was April.
It was like the epitome of innocence that had been preyed upon.
This is a case that has no evidence. We didn't have DNA. We didn't have fingerprints.
I was asking myself over and over, is this the killer?
Her phone told us the tale of her murder.
We were living in a nightmare. I don't wish this on anybody.
It's the middle of the summer in the small village of Armada, Michigan. 14-year-old April Millsap heads out the door to walk the family dog, Penny.
April and Penny were like best friends. You can't separate the two. April told me before I went to work that she was going to walk Penny on the trail. Okay, have a good time. I mean, that's the only thing that goes through my mind.
I didn't think anything bad, anything good. It was just a typical day.
April usually walks Penny along the Macomb Orchard Trail, a popular bike path that runs through Armada. Several hours of daylight are left on this summer day.
She headed out around 5 o'clock, 5:30.
Nearly 2 hours later, April hasn't returned home.
I started calling, and there was no answer.
Jennifer's texts are also not returned.
That's when I started thinking something was wrong.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain we just found a body along the mountain bike trail.
Is it a male or a female?
Female. She's off of the trail, touched back into the woods.
Okay, and you don't believe she's breathing?
I don't believe so, no.
A young couple were on the trail and they came across a dog that was very upset. And it was moving back and forth, trying to investigate what's wrong with the dog. The gentleman looks into the woods and he observes a lifeless body.
Within minutes, police arrive on the scene.
I arrived at the crime scene, and in the bushes, there was a ditch. On one side of the ditch was a small white tennis shoe. On the other side of the ditch was a second tennis shoe. The young lady didn't appear to be a full teenager. The top of her clothing was ripped off of her. Her shorts and her underwear were ripped to her ankles. There was a vicious stamp mark with herringbone imprint of the bottom of a shoe across her lower face and neck. It was a pitiful scene.
It's been 41 years since Armada recorded a homicide. Now this small village of 1,700 has been struck by a horrific murder.
As the police chief, I'm looking at it as some violent, almost obsessed intruder came into my community and hurt one of my kids. It was now my job to find that person and convict that person.
The young victim has no form of identification on her and no cell phone. While police comb the scene, the dog is taken to the local animal shelter to be examined for DNA evidence.
As we are reaching out to get assistance from different departments, a mother shows up at the perimeter of the crime scene with a young man. She tells us that her daughter was missing.
The woman is Jennifer Millsap. She tells police that she and her daughter's boyfriend are looking for April.
Her daughter was walking the family dog, Penny. She gave us a description of the dog, gave us a description of her young daughter and what she was wearing. It became apparent that the dog we had was Penny and that the body was April Millsap, 14 years of age.
As is normal procedure, investigators don't provide any details about the crime scene or the victim.
We were not comfortable with giving out any information until we had an opportunity to interview these people. We had the mother and the boyfriend go back to the station and started to put together the investigation.
All we know is that the police found something out there.
I'm working and Jennifer calls and she is hysterical. She's not making much sense. All I'm hearing is April missing and police station. I go to the police station and they told me that I needed to wait outside because they're trying to keep everybody separated at that moment.
At the station, Jennifer files a missing persons report. She tells police that when April didn't come home, she called April's boyfriend, Austin. Austin told her that he hadn't seen April at all that day, but he did get an unusual text from her at 6:28 p.m. The text read, "I think I almost got kidnapped."
They were kind of quarreling, so he thought nothing of it until I mentioned that April wasn't home yet.
Separately, police begin to question 15-year-old Austin. He tells investigators a similar story.
According to the boyfriend, he and April were in some sort of a little bit of a young a puppy love tiff, and he was ignoring her.
I remember pulling my phone out, unlocked it. It said, "I think I almost got kidnapped, OMFG." And at first, I'm thinking, well, this is like creepy old guys in the stores checking her out. No big deal. She's just over-exaggerating.
And what time was that on there at?
6:28. I responded at 7:44.
That took you a while to respond, though, huh?
It was very curious to us as to why would the boyfriend have received this text and not tried to figure out where she was or what was going on.
We're at the cemetery and it's in the middle of the woods, I'm not gonna have any signal.
He said that he and his buddy were in the cemetery, which was corroborated by his friend. They also said that they went to a fast food restaurant in Richmond, Michigan.
Austin's account of the evening will need to be verified. He's a person of interest, but is allowed to go home. During the interviews, April's stepdad remains outside.
So as I'm sitting outside, I'm listening to the radio, and the news is talking all about a young lady being found on the trail, but I'm not putting it together at the moment until about 45 minutes later. I'm realizing the news is talking about April, but they're not using her name, young lady, young woman. I was a little, I don't know how to say it, dazed. It's just a bad place to be. I met April when she was 6 years old, and she was a great kid. We used to fly kites together, play in the yard, play with the dogs, loved riding on a mini bike around the yard. She loved animals, and she was the only girl I ever knew that liked playing with bugs or spiders or snakes. If I said, "Hey, look at the frog," she'd go catch it. She meant the world to me. And the waiting, trying to find out what happened, was killing me.
Investigators question April's stepdad to find out where he was earlier that day. David tells them, and police verify that he was at work. When he's finally reunited with Jennifer, he keeps what he heard on the news to himself.
I was told by the police not to say anything to Jennifer about it until they had a chance to tell her. I couldn't even comprehend it myself. I mean, how could this be?
Even though that we were comfortable in our minds that it was April that was out on the Macomb Orchard Trail, we still needed to investigate farther.
We were there pretty much the whole night. We knew something was going on.
By 8 the next morning, April's parents are allowed to leave. They soon get a visit from the FBI.
When she showed us the picture, it was definitely a total loss of control of my emotions at the moment. It was a very emotional point of my life.
It's like a nightmare that I still haven't woken up from, knowing that she's never coming back.
As news of a body found on the trail continues to spread, additional officers arrive in Armada. Overnight, the town has transformed from a safe, quiet village to a community on edge.
The people within the village felt violated. There had been a murder committed in our town, and they were outraged.
The townspeople were worried that their children were not safe, and so there was a panic, not knowing who would have done this and are they going to do it again. We had to find this killer, and we had to find him right away.
Hours after the body of 14-year-old April Millsap is found on a popular hiking trail, resources continue to pour into the small village of Armada.
When I arrived, I started getting more information on what had occurred, and I actually have a daughter who was 14 years old at the time, and it was that much more heartbreaking. It's really hard to not keep putting myself in that position that what would I think, what would I do, how would I feel if this had been my daughter?
Looking at her, she just looked like the epitome of innocence that had been preyed upon like some sort of a animal. And it was just a horrible, horrible scene. And it was hard to believe how a predator could have done this in this area, especially with the amount of people that use that path.
The conclusion of the medical examiner was it was death by asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. The stomping of her windpipe of her neck to the point that it collapsed, it was just a brutal way to attack somebody.
It was strong enough that it left shoe prints on her neck and her face area with the pattern of the bottom of the shoe. It kind of led me to believe that we were just looking for some form of a monster out there.
The shoe imprint was so clear that it was something that we could match against if we found the killer's shoes. With her shirt and bra being pulled down and her pants being pulled down, obviously we thought that she had been raped.
So a rape kit was done. The results are not immediate.
Police released photos of April Millsap to the media, confirming she is the girl who had been found dead on the trail. The tiny village of Armada reels from the news.
Such a horrible thing. April was such a sweet girl. I was a counselor in Armada Middle School, and so I knew her very well. She was warm, she was friendly, she liked school, she liked her friends. We had a room set up at the middle school, a place where kids could come and express themselves. It was a very powerful time, very emotional.
It was a sense of pain, but it was also a sense of fear.
People started locking their doors for the first time. Kids were walking in pairs rather than by themselves, and you did not hear kids playing out in the street. I mean, it doesn't happen in a small town, and now it's your town. Now what do you do?
Police set up a tip line, hoping someone will come forward with information that will lead to the killer. They continue to search the trail for April's phone and backpack.
Those items held valuable information, possible DNA, possible fingerprints, so that was important to us.
Later that day, April's dog Penny is returned home from animal control.
And she was just running around and just, I guess, happy to be home. I don't know if it hit her yet that April wasn't there. If Penny could actually talk, we could know exactly what happened.
Detectives work off the theory that April was killed shortly after she texted her boyfriend, Austin, at 6:28 p.m. They need to verify Austin's whereabouts around that time.
Got McDonald's, drive-through. We came back. But I don't know what the text message I got from April. I know it was at 6:28. With how everything lines up, I'm not sure where I was, but I think I was at the cemetery.
We were able to get the videotape from the fast food restaurant. We see Austin going through the drive-through at approximately 6:30 in the evening, and there's no way Austin could have been in the fast food restaurant at 6:30 in Richmond and murdering April at 6:30 in Armada.
So we knew that Austin couldn't have committed the murder.
Detectives hope that the people of Armada can help crack the case. Already, calls are pouring into the tip line.
We received a tip from a young girl who said that she was out in front of her house when a white van drove by very slowly. And it appeared the two passengers in the van, one of them pointed at her.
It really gave her an eerie enough feeling that she took a video of this and reported that white van to us. We definitely want to locate that white van, find out why it was in that neighborhood and who was driving it.
Certainly everybody in Armada was concerned. Where do we find that van?
Less than 24 hours after April Millsap's murder, investigators may have a big break in the case. A suspicious white van that seems to be following young girls.
It was definitely something we had to track down. We didn't have a license plate, though, and so tracking down this white van became quite difficult to do.
Police turned to the local community for help and released the grainy image of the van.
A builder called in and said that the van that we had released to the media was his van, and it was in fact him that was in that subdivision. And he wasn't pointing at the young lady, he was pointing at houses in the subdivision that he had built.
The man brings his van to the Armada police station to be examined, which turns up no evidence.
We were able to definitively clear that van, that builder, from the suspect list.
While the white van is a dead end, police sort through hundreds of tips from the public.
We got a huge tip from a father and two of his daughters who had seen April on the path that evening.
The two daughters went to school with April. They know who she is. And April is talking to an older man on a blue and white motorcycle, and he's wearing a black helmet.
The father described the motorcycle as an off-road enduro, blue and white motorbike. With this tip, we actually have an interaction between April and another person.
On the heels of that promising tip comes another lead.
It was a mother-daughter combination that was riding their bike on the path on the day the murder occurred and called in to tell us they too saw a male with a motorcycle, moped-style bike talking to a young female who was walking her dog.
They went and did their loop and turned back around. By the time they came back, the young girl and the dog were no longer there, and all they saw was the motorcycle parked on the path. And one of the witnesses looked to the side in the woods and saw the man was standing there, looking at her, shocked as if he had been caught doing something wrong.
It actually scared the two women. They continued on. It wasn't until the next day, until after the media reports, that they called in and they gave us this information. The question I asked myself is, did they actually pass them as the murder was being committed?
It was very important to locate him and identify this guy because it was starting to look a little bit like this could be the killer.
Police bring in a sketch artist to work with the young woman who got a good look at the man's eyes.
When I saw this sketch, I thought, this is our guy. Who is he, and can he be matched to somebody that's out there?
Investigators continue to search for April's missing cell phone, which is still sending out pings to a cell tower in Armada.
With the help of some of the federal agencies, we ended up with a tracking truck out there that could track cellular signals.
I've received an indication that her phone was in very close proximity to where I was driving. I notified Michigan State Police to target our search in that immediate vicinity.
The search indicates April's cell phone is in an overgrown thicket by the side of the road. A tracking dog helps them locate the phone.
I was over the moon when we found that phone. I knew that that would be our gateway to finding out who did this.
The cell phone is sent to the lab, where it will be dusted for evidence and its digital contents analyzed, while the search intensifies for the man on the blue and white motorcycle.
At one point later in the day, I grabbed some lunch with my mom, who lives right outside of the town of Armada. And on my way back to the command center, I spotted a motorcycle down in a driveway parked next to a garage. I thought to myself, what if that could honestly belong to the killer and I don't turn around to go take a look at it? So I turned around, pulled in the driveway, took a few photos of it, and took that back to the command center.
I looked at it and I said, absolutely, go out there and find out who rides this motorcycle.
With the information we had from the bike and the license plate, we found the owner of that bike to be James Van Callis.
We pulled up his driver's license photo and compared it to the sketch we had. And it was uncanny. It looked just like the sketch.
I immediately looked at it and thought, oh my God, I think this is the same guy. We need to find this person as soon as possible.
One day into the search for April Millsap's killer, investigators tracked down the owner of a motorcycle who witnesses believe they saw with April before she disappeared. James Van Callis.
His driver's license picture, the composite rendering, are so similar that we needed to get out there that night and talk to Van Callis.
That evening at approximately 11 p.m., I went with another detective and one of our uniform officers out to make contact with James Van Callis.
32-year-old James Van Callis lives 15 miles outside of Armada in Goodles, Michigan.
James answered the questions I asked. He told me that he was in Armada the night before on his motorcycle, that he had stopped at a gas station for a minute, but that he was on his way through Armada to go visit his brother at his brother's house.
Van Callis claims he left home around 5:30 p.m. and arrived at his brother's by 6 and stayed there until 7:30.
Did admit that he owns a black helmet. He told me he was wearing a pair of K-Swiss and went in the house willingly to retrieve them. Eventually, a female came out as well, later identified as James' girlfriend. She was reinforcing what James was telling me that he was wearing, including these shoes at that time. The entire time I was questioning him, I was asking myself over and over, is this the killer? I had a really weird feeling about him, and something just wasn't right.
It quickly becomes clear that the K-Swiss shoe treads are not a match.
I immediately noted the tread pattern in the K-Swiss was extremely different than the tread pattern we were looking for.
At the station, police run a criminal background check on James Vancalis.
Vancalis' criminal history, even though he had one, appeared to be nothing on his criminal record that would show that he had any propensity for violence.
They also check his alibi.
Vancalis had told Peckman that he just went through Armada to go to his brother's house and arrived at his brother's house around 6 p.m.
In light of the information that James had provided, we went to the gas station in Armada and asked about video footage. And we did have an individual on a motorcycle driving on that video at 6:17 p.m., the night of the murder.
Investigators also obtained surveillance video from a home security system belonging to an Armada firefighter. The firefighter lives 2 blocks north of the crime scene. The blue and white motorcycle passes the home at 6:51 p.m.
We now have digital documentation that, in fact, he was in Armada at the time of the murder. It certainly appears that Vancalis is hiding something from us.
Two days after April's murder, the community holds a candlelight vigil.
It was a good thing to bring everybody together, to grieve together, pray together, get that feeling of love going back through us, because that was something that was lost.
There were pink ribbons around town, and there were signs that said, "Justice for April."
There was a bike-a-thon on the trail, so people could come up and reclaim the trail as, this is our trail. How dare you do something like this to a beloved member of our community?
It was a good feeling to have all these people there in support of April.
The turnout was just amazing. April touched more people than she probably knew.
As the citizens of Armada rally for April, Sergeant Peckman returns to Vancalis' home to test his alibi.
I wanted to narrow down his timeline and really lock him into a story now based off the information he had given me the night before. James told me that he was a little busy and he had some errands to run, and he could reach out to me later in the afternoon when he was done. Became the afternoon, and I had not heard from James Vancalis yet. I called Vancalis on the phone, and he was in a completely different mood than he was when I contacted him that day. He was very angry. He was screaming that we were on a witch hunt, and he wasn't gonna do anything for us.
It looked like James had some sort of switch. Vancalis looked like the sketch. He had a motorcycle that looked like the one seen with April. And then he lied about when he arrived at his brother's. Those key factors led to a search warrant of Vancalis' home.
4 days later, police raid the Vancalis home.
Once we got into the home, we realized that he had a marijuana grow operation in the backyard. So we arrested him. It was enough to hold him until we sorted out what other items we found in that home.
As James Vancalis sits in jail, an unexpected witness steps forward with a bombshell for investigators.
As soon as James was arrested, I was relieved because now I could finally talk to the police and tell them my secret.
2 weeks after police raided the home of James Van Callis, a suspect in the murder of April Millsap, his girlfriend Crystal Stadler steps forward.
I met James right out of high school, so I was about 18, 19 maybe. He was nice at the time, but over the years, James changed and he was abusive. He would push me down and he smacked me across the face. If I wanted to leave him, he would always threaten me that he was gonna kill my family. So I could really never leave. It was bad.
Crystal shares with the police new information about the night of April Millsap's murder.
I specifically remember James tell the officers that he was wearing K-Swiss shoes that night. James was not wearing K-Swisses at the time. He had on his Air Nikes. I knew James was lying to the police, but I could not say anything because something probably would have happened to me.
Crystal recalls even more from the night of the murder.
I woke up in the middle of the night and James was cleaning his shoes with a sock. He had hand sanitizer sitting next to him, and he told me he was cleaning oil off his shoes. The next morning, I noticed the shoes were gone.
It was an absolute changing point during the whole investigation.
Detectives combed through Van Callis's social media accounts.
We found a picture of James wearing the specific black tennis shoes. And we ended up buying an identical pair to compare with the tread marks we had on April's face. It was that same herringbone pattern.
It was one of those aha moments. This was one of those solid pieces of evidence that I could turn to a jury and say, we've got the right guy.
The tread match is important evidence for investigators, but since the original shoes have never been found, it's impossible to claim a 100% match.
We had a good circumstantial case. However, we didn't have the DNA evidence.
DNA samples from the rape kit, April's clothes, and Van Callis's motorcycle helmet have yet to return. It could take months for the results to be processed.
We were at a standstill as far as getting enough proof to charge Van Callis.
A unique discovery was made. April had an exercise app that she was using on her phone that day. And her phone told us the tale of her murder.
Right during the text that she sent, she was almost kidnapped. The path on this app showed that she started walking faster. And shortly after that, the path went into the woods in a zigzag pattern. It went on for 10 minutes.
That line was just scribbling back and forth, and you couldn't help but think about what April was going through and what she was thinking. Was she thinking at that moment, I'm about to die?
The moment that phone gets back on the trail, we know that the murderer has the phone and the phone is being transported. And probably the single most important piece of evidence in this whole case was the fact that that phone went past the security system of that fireman.
The firefighter's video catches the Enduro motorcycle passing his house at the same exact time that April's phone is passing that house.
Now we have it. April's phone talked to us. I might not have DNA, I might not have blood, but I've got that phone in his possession from April, from the spot where she was murdered, going past the surveillance camera. We now have a strong enough case to bring murder charges against James Van Callis for the brutal slaying of April Millsap.
The question remains, why?
So James Van Callis was going to his brother's house. He's traveling through Armada, and he sees April go towards the Macomb Orchard Trail. He follows her down. He stalks her right onto the trail.
The theory would be that she refused his advances, and it made him very angry, enough for him to try and take her and rape her, and that he killed her in the process.
When he wasn't able to control April, I think that ultimately did enrage him, and that rage poured out at that moment.
Ten weeks after April Millsap was found dead on the Orchard Trail, James Vancallis is charged with her murder.
We charged him with the first-degree murder of April Millsap, felony murder, kidnapping of April Millsap, and the attempted rape of April Millsap.
That was a big sigh of relief knowing that he's locked up now.
I was glad that James was arrested, but it's not bringing her back.
A year and a half after April Millsap's murder, the trial of James Vancallis begins. The defense argues the lack of any physical evidence connecting Vancallis to the murder leaves plenty of room for reasonable doubt.
Before any analysis is done on the helmet, before any results are back, Mr. Vancallis is charged. There are about 20 lab tests that are done. All of those reports, each and every one of them comes back absolutely zero. There is nothing.
The defense did a very nice job on the lack of physical evidence, and that was the biggest elephant in the room that I had to get around.
As the prosecution calls its witnesses, much of their case rides on the testimony of one person, James Vancallis' former girlfriend, Crystal Stadler.
My most important witness in this case is Crystal Stadler. This is a person who has been intimate with him, who lives with him, who has known him for 7+ years.
She had to look out in that room 10 feet away and see him, the person who has terrified her, and tell the truth.
If James Vancallis was acquitted, she was in terrible danger.
Do you recognize what it is I have handed you?
Yeah, you.
On the stand, Crystal Stadler fills in crucial details about the actions of her former boyfriend, James Vancallis, on the day of April Millsap's murder.
When Crystal Stadler took the stand, she was nervous, she was afraid, because the controlling individual that had been controlling of her so much was sitting at the defendant's table.
At first, I was afraid to testify against James, but since I was on the right side, I felt it was right to do the right thing.
Had you ever seen him clean his shoes before?
No.
She ties together the shoes, the bike, all of the characterizations that we use, all of the circumstantial evidence that we use comes directly from her. Does he say anything to you when he comes back to bed?
Yeah, that he messed up and he needed me to stand by his side.
I believe Crystal taking that stand and being able to testify against James was the beginning of her freeing herself from the shackles that James had her in for a very long time.
When the defense presents its case, James Vancallis opts not to take the stand.
The defendant did not present any witnesses. Defense did not present any physical evidence on Mr. Vancallis's behalf.
You get those butterflies in your stomach, like, oh boy, what's gonna happen? It's just a sick feeling of anticipation.
My big fear was that it wasn't enough to find him guilty and he'd be out.
Everything was at stake because I could not imagine if he would have walked free.
After deliberating for 6 hours, the jury returns with a verdict.
Count 1, first-degree premeditated murder. We find the defendant guilty. Count 2, first-degree felony murder, guilty.
each time they said guilty, it was like a nail driven into his coffin.
Count 3, kidnapping. We find the defendant guilty.
I know I was extremely excited. There was cheering in the courtroom. I just felt that, we did what we needed to do for April.
First-degree murder and felony murder. In Michigan, that means life in prison without parole.
I felt great that he was going away for the rest of his life. I'm glad that Jennifer could get the relief knowing that he did it.
Granted, it's not gonna bring April back, but justice was served.
The defense files 2 appeals to reverse the conviction, but the Michigan Supreme Court of Appeals denies them. James Van Callis will never again be a free man.
I don't know what real justice is. I'm hoping that everybody's kids are safer now than with him out on the street.
I felt the community let out a breath. Now we can move on. And that's what our community did.
While time carries on in Armada, for Jennifer and David, life without April will never be the same.
Yes, there's an empty spot in our lives, but there's also a spot in our lives that we have her memory. Just remembering April's smile or her laugh will get me through a bad day.
Every July 24th and every one of April's birthdays, I still reach out to Jennifer to let her know that I'm thinking of her. Nothing I can ever do is enough to let them know how bad I feel about what happened to April.
There's a park in Armada right now, the April Millsap Park. And there's a silhouette of Penny with April by the side of the trail.
They cared a lot about each other when she was around. I'm sure Penny never forgot about April.
I miss April every moment of her day. Not a day that goes by. She doesn't cross my mind. I remember April as the kind, loving, caring, sunshine person that she was.